Great to see you guys out there today. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm sure a few more people will drop in as we get going here. So we're going to start off with introductions. Thanks everybody for joining today. My name is William Grismore, co-founder of 27 Virtual. My primary role with the company is as the NSX-T architect. Also with us today is Andrew Grismore. He's going to be monitoring the question and chat area and chiming in every once in a while. So if you guys have questions, please post them to the question and answer tabs in Zoom. So that way you can post a question and then we can answer the question and go through, and Andrew will monitor that, as will DJ. And also with us today, the illustrious DJ Antonucci with NSX CEO, and he is going to be talking about their migration assistance tool, or the NSX MAT tool. A few basic things. We're recording the session. If you have coworkers that couldn't make it today, or you want to share the word, we're going to record this. We'll post it to our 27 Virtual website under the events page, and you can always redirect people back there. Microphones are muted during the session, so if you got some comments or something, again, just post them to the chat, right? And put them into the Q&A. The Q&A is actually the best way to do it, right? So do that. At the end, please stick around to the end, and we're going to be giving away some $100 Amazon gift cards to those folks that complete the post survey. So when you leave the webinar at the end, it'll redirect you to a page and just complete the survey form. And then we're going to give away a few of those $100 Amazon gift cards to people that complete the survey. So we're going to dive right in. We have a limited amount of time here. So we have an hour. So you want to make sure we squeeze in as much as we can. Again, you know, the more people that ask questions, the better. I want to try to keep it as interactive as we can as we go through it. So as I'm sure you're all aware, as of January 16th, the NSX-V had reached its end of general support. You can still get support, but you have to send an email, and you have to know who to send the email to. So you have to have a relationship with your VMware core rep or your VMware NSX overlay account executive or SE, and establish a email-based ticketing system. Also, there are no new updates or anything, and we all know that things are going to 3. So there's definitely an urgency to get people on 3. So that's what this is all about. So we can get you off of something that's not under general support. We're also going to look at migration methods. What are the different ways to migrate? And then there's some different approaches with those methods. And then we're going to look at the pre-migration requirements. There are some certain checkboxes you can check off to make sure your environment's ready to migrate. Then we'll look at what actual objects get migrated as part of the migration. I'm going to walk you through the 2 most common migration methods, because we don't have time to cover all of them. And then some of the lessons learned, you know, that we have around that. And then we're going to talk about some 27 virtual custom scripts that we leverage. We've done some custom stuff out there for different customers, which is pretty cool. And then we're going to look at the NSX solution. So it's kind of a way to break it down. There's basically doing migrations manually or scripting. There's using the VMware Migration Coordinator tool that may still require some scripting, maybe, because it can't do certain things. And then there's the NSX Migration Assistance tool, which is awesome. And we've done some pretty amazing things with them as well. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one. I think we all know, right, why to migrate to NSX-T. So that's pretty much a given at this point. We know that it's end of general support. We know that all the new features are being built into NSX-T. One thing I will point out, though, is that the new features by using NSX-T with vSphere 7 with the latest update is important, so that when you migrate, what we want to try to do is get people to migrate to NSX-T with vSphere 7, so we don't have to build an NVDS at the host level. We'll talk about that a little bit. We want to try to get you on the converge VDS concept. What are the main migration methods? So the main migration methods are an in-place migrate, where you just have a current single site NSX-V deployment. You're going to do an in-place migration. Notice it's not upgrade, because it's not an upgrade. It's a migration, kind of shifting things around. And when you get to the ESGs going to NSX-T edge nodes, there's definitely going to be a little bit of an outage as you make the switch from one set of edges to the other, you know, maybe for, 30 seconds or so. It depends exactly on how you can time that down, but definitely be an outage there. The two most common ones I'm going to walk you through here in just a minute are the coexist and the with lift and shift, which means you basically have the same vCenter. So you're going to have a vCenter with an NSX-V manager and your NSX-V controllers, and you're going to have NSX-T pointing to the same vCenter, and you're going to lift and shift that around by moving your host around. Maybe you have some new hardware, or maybe you're going to repurpose some existing hardware. The coexist is more like we have stood up a brand new software-defined data center on-prem, or maybe even in the cloud, like a VMC on AWS, or maybe I just have a brand new VCF stack or hyper-converged infrastructure I want to move to, or a 3-tier architecture I built from scratch, and we're going to use HCX to migrate to it. The main thing on the last one is we're talking about having two separate vCenters. So coexist, lift and shift the middle one vCenter with newer existing hardware, and then coexist HCX migrations with two separate vCenters. So if we're doing network migration, we're going to use HCX to build a layer 2 extension between the two stacks, whether they're on-prem in the same data center, different colo, or VMC in AWS, whatever it may be. DJ put this together. So there are some different migration approaches. I really like the way you did this, DJ, by the way. So you can do a manual migration. And if you look at the side there, is it automated? No. Is it standalone tool? No. Is it actionable and reporting? No. Any inventory assessment? I mean, it is manual, and it's definitely not going to support if you have two vCenters and you're doing a cross vCenter NSX-V. So manual is possible, maybe for certain customers, smaller, or maybe just networking only, and that's all they're doing. And you could kind of argue manual is not so bad. And we've done quite a few of those actually, where it's pretty straightforward. We're doing some manual configurations and we migrate the workloads. When you get into firewall rules, though, it gets a little bit different. Migration Coordinator, it is a free tool, which is good. It does allow you to migrate from V to T, either in the in-place method. The most common use case for the Migration Coordinator for everything that we've done with the migrations we've done, we've done over 30 migrations, is to leverage the Migration Coordinator basically as a firewall rule mover, right? So if the firewall rules are not too complex and the Migration Coordinator can understand them, then you can basically build a brand new NSX-T environment, leverage the Migration Coordinator, and then migrate the firewall rules. Now, there are a few caveats to that, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. And then the ultimate way to do it would be to leverage the REST NSX Migration Assistance tool. The assistance tool is great. It's very simple to install as an OBA deployment. You deploy it, stand it up, you point it to your vCenter and NSX-V manager. And the great thing about it is it can do an inventory report of your environment and help you do an assessment. So you get an idea of what you currently have. Now you can do an assessment with the other ones, but they're all manual. Like the Migration Coordinator doesn't have like a built-in assessment tool. So you kind of have to, like with manual and Migration Coordinator, you have to, we have a worksheet that we built that we kind of go through and, check, what kind of firewall rules do you have? Are you doing groups and tags? Do you have IP sets? Do you have firewall rules with just the VM in the rule? Because when you look at NSX-T, there are just certain firewall rule things that aren't compatible, right? The other thing that kind of goes over all of this also is what other things are you doing? Like, are you doing NSX-V load balancing? Those type of things. Now, within this kind of migration approaches, where we come into play as a partner in helping customers do migrations is we add in the custom scripting. And I think the way to look at it is each one of these could leverage some custom script, right? Of course, manual scripting goes together. Migration Coordinator by itself all the time may still need some assistance with the script. And then the REST NSX Migration Assistance tool is fantastic, but there could be some very particular corner use cases where you might need a little script or a tweak, or it could be added into the tool, which is another option. And one of the great things about the REST NSX tool is that if there's something that's unique in your environment, DJ and his team of developers can go in and actually modify the tool to your needs, right? So how do we come into play? We have some very good scripting things that we've done, IP set injection in the source when you want to migrate firewall rules in a slow fashion. Migrate VMs and do this gateway flip. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And migrate VMs from the source with, they got groups and tags in the source. You migrate the VM to the target, and we need to be able to assign the tag. We have some custom scripting that we built for that for particular use cases. One thing we do a lot of, if customers have a VRA in their environment, and NSX-V is configured as an endpoint, and they have custom workflows that are leveraging NSX-V for networking, security, and load balancing. And we have done some custom work there. And I am going to, give me 1 second here. I'm going to take and upgrade Damien there. Let me know if you get upgraded Damien to panelist. So Damien, just real quick, just for conversation for everybody. So talk about some of these scripts that you built and how they can help customers in different scenarios. Is your mic available? There you go.
Oh, I'm here. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, as Bill said, we developed a lot of different scripts. It could be workflows as well. Because as we said, for example, between NSX-V and T, there's a lot of things that change. For example, the way that we cannot add a VM into a rule in NSX-T anymore. So we have to create groups first, things like that. Or for example, we had another customer having some need to, migrate security tags to NSX-T, which is not the same. So yeah, we ended up doing anyway some scripts or using VRA or VRO to do some workflows to help migrating to T. I mean, I don't know if you want me, I can share some of what.
Yeah, let me stop sharing, and I'll let you go ahead and do it.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, also things like load balancer, we've done that a lot lately. Even creating some workflow that recreates the entire load balancer, on demand. So for example, in here, I was thinking about showing you guys one of the reasons we had to do some scripting was also for the logical switches. Between V and T, we had to migrate some switch and keeping the same segment ID to T. So for example, in here, we have T with some segments that needs to be recreated here. So we ended up using some script, which is using REST API. So it's all documented and following best practices from VMware. And in here, we have different ways that we can execute the scripts. For example, if I just want to validate first the segments, I can put some arguments here. Well, let me show you, for example, this one. There's a couple of arguments you can choose when you execute a script. Like this one is made just to validate the segments. This one is made to change the segments. So creating the segment in T. And the other one is pretty much handling some rules, as Bill said, that we can, automatically recreate the rule as what they were in V. Yeah, this time in T. So for example, if I wanted to start with the segments, I can usually very easily just look at what I have in V compared to T. So this is just a validation before doing anything else. That's what I usually like to do for a customer before doing anything else. Everything is logged. So everything that you see right there, we have a huge logs file. Everything is over there. So I can look at how it is in V, how it's going to look like in T, just to make sure, for example, we have the right, tier 1. Because one of the challenge when you migrate segments, for example, is that the segments in T needs to have the tier 1 connected. You need to specify also, the subnets that needs to be configured. So that's one of the things that the script is doing. It's going to look in NSX-V, taking which segment is connected to which subnet and which DLR. And then in the script, we have some section in the configuration of the script, like the JSON file that we use with the credentials, the manager, things like that. We also have the relation between what's in V and what's in T. For example, if you want to specify which DLR should be what's the relation between the DLR and the tier 1 in T, you do it this way. So that, for example, in here, it sees that there's a segment connected to this DLR. So if we create the same thing in T, it's going to be created and connected to this tier 1. So now if I want to do, that's just a validation. Now, if I go ahead and want to change those, so recreate those objects in T, I'm going to have to accept just to make sure. And now if I go back to T, if I refresh, I'm going to have my segments created with the right gateway connected and the subnets that we need to work on. So, and that's very valuable because we need, especially if you do some bridging when you need the same, VNI ID between the two, that's a way to do it. And depending on how many segments you have, that could be pretty useful. Again, as I said, one of the reasons we ended up doing some script was to recreate the rules between V and T for customer having a huge amount of rules that could be beneficial as well. So for example, in V, if I wanted to, well, let me remove this one. If I want to create a new rule in V, right, I want to call it, I don't know, the webinar new demo, for example, or something like that. And as I said, one of the tricky between V and T is that in here you can specify VM, right? But not in T. So we have to find a way to change that so it can still work, especially because sometimes the VM are not migrated to T yet. So we need to figure out a way to do it. So what I do here, for example, let's say, yeah, new or whatever. If I want to specify, an IP could be on a destination, for example. If I go ahead and select, I don't know, this one, for example, and I can select another one in source. All right. Let's publish. Now, if I go back to T, obviously, I don't have that firewall rule created. So what the script is going to do, we can do the same. So I can start by making sure it works. So I can do one rule at a time, or I can do like a bulk, which is going to handle all the rules together. In that case, that's the 1015 rule. So if I go back here, 1015. This is just for validation first, just to make sure, for example, it's probably just me making sure the JSON file is going to be correct and things like that, as you can see right there. So if that's the case, then we can go ahead and try to recreate those groups. And what it's going to do is going to create a group in T, but the group is going to be having like a regular expression, meaning that since I don't have the VM in T, and since I cannot connect the VM in a rule, I have to create a group, and the group has to get an expression that will be like the VM name's going to start with, or it's going to be equal to the name of the VM. So that way, if I go back now in here in T, if I refresh, I see that rule has been created, and as you can see, it's not a VM anymore because it's not supported, but we have a group that name SRC first, or destination. And that group, if I go back to my group, I go to groups. Now, if I want to look at whatever, what's the name of it? Should be DST, webinar, new demo, something like that. So if I go here, click view members, I have a group definition that says, for example, the VM equals that machine, right? But if I go to the affected member, I see this machine is not there yet because it has not been migrated. Although I think the first one, so the other one might be in source. The other one, which is here, for example, well, yeah, you see, so this one says the same thing. It's the criteria, although the machine has already been migrated. So the group is already populated with the VM. So that's exactly what we wanted to do. And it does the same thing, not just for, it's the entire rule. So basically, for example, if you have some new services created in V, it's going to do the same in T. It's going to recreate the services. And and everything's going to be the same as V basically. And we usually use PowerShell to do it because it's very convenient. Although we have a lot of customers using VRA, so we ended up doing some other workflow like this. Like for example, we had some customer asking for recreating, the security tags. So in here, very easily, I can specify, for example, that VM. I want that, that new tag to be created. Could be, maybe demo, for example. And then you can assign that using a workflow, which from time to time, I think it's even better because you have a UI instead of just a script. And it does exactly the same thing right now. If I go back to my machine, I'm going to pick this one. I have my tag, and the tag has been applied right away. Or sometimes what we do is we create groups with the same name of the tag. So it depends on what the customer is looking for, but we could create groups, which is going to be the same as what you have in V with the security tag. It's going to be a group, but the group will be linked to a tag name. So that way, when the machine is going to be migrated to T, the machine is going to be populated and assigned to that group automatically. So that's very simple to do. And we ended up doing, as I said at the beginning, doing a lot of load balancer as well. Like for example, we did some crazy configuration like this one, which was, recreating the exact same load balancer that we had in V, but this time in T. We did a lot of different things. Like, for example, this one is even more interesting because we created load balancer on demand using VRA or just VRO if you want to use just VRO. And the way it is working right now, it's creating, deploying the load balancer, but also destroying the load balancer if needed and scaling out in and out. So that's something that some customers were interested in us doing.
Very good.
So anyway, there's many different ways to play with NSX-T during that migration, and I would say Orchestrator is a nice tool to have to be able to help us doing that.
Hey, thanks a lot, Damien. That's awesome. So basically, some really good stuff. So I guess what I want to say about this is that there's these methods, and each one of these methods could always use an additional script. So something 27 Virtual can do is add that little extra special sauce in the right spot where it's needed by adding the proper scripting to help make sure the migration goes a little bit smoother, which adds a lot of value to the overall process. These are just some examples of what Damien was talking about with some of the scripts. And I'm going to go through some of those step-by-step process, and then I'm going to turn over to DJ for his demo. But just real quick, there's an update to NSX-T 3.2. So the new version of the migration coordinator does have some additional capability. It used to be limited to only 5 topologies and has supports like bring your own topology. It does support migrating from the NSX-V load balancer to the advanced load balancer in a lift and ship mode. So you can actually kind of build it and then migrate the configuration from V to the NSX-T advanced load balancer or AVI load balancer. Support for some guest introspection third party if it supports migration coordinator. Identity-based firewall migration is now supported, which is interesting, and support for OSPF for single site, VIO, VMware integrated OpenStack, identity-based firewall. And then it also sets the export version of the firewall rules, which is a requirement before the migration. And you can see now, if you saw, I didn't keep the 3.1 slides, but the scale is just huge from what it used to be for the migration coordinator. So what I'm trying to walk you through is like manual method with some scripting. Migration coordinator could still use some additional scripting to help it along, right? And then there would be the MAT tool, which is by restfulsex, which imagine some of the scripting that Damien is showing you, but in a nice clean interface that just has everything built in, has the ability to do assessment, has the ability to roll back. It has all these things already, he's already done all the heavy lifting and done a bunch of different migrations. Before we get into that though, I just want to hit here pre-migration requirements. So before you migrate, what do you need to do? I mean, this is pretty well documented out there, but identify your use cases. Is it just networking? Is it just firewall? Is it both? Like Damien just showed you, do you have a load balancer to migrate from V to T? Is there a VRA in play that you need to update workflows with, or NAT, or whatever it may be? The version of NSX-V needs to be 6.4.4 or later. We recommend 6.4.8 or 10 to support the vSphere 7 deployment. The VXLAN port's got to be 4.7.8.9. So there is, at some point from V, I don't know, version 6.2, they changed the port. So just make sure that you didn't revert back to the old port. Unicast has to be the setting for your transport zones. BGP is only supported with Federation only supports BGP. Local can support BGP or OSPF. The web-based SSL VPN has been deprecated. Be aware of that. And always do your firewall rule cleanup. And DJ can talk about that here in a minute with his tool. vSphere, try to go to vSphere 7, right? So you can take advantage of the converged VDS. So that way you don't have to migrate to T, build an NVDS, which is going to be deprecated in 4 months. So try to get yourself onto vSphere 7, update 2, and to do that, get your NSX-V upgraded first, upgrade your vSphere, and then do your migration. What we recommend typically, and what we see typically, is we do an NSX-T design and an NSX-T deploy. We get it all configured and working. 99% of the time, most customers don't want to do an in-place upgrade. They want to do a lift and shift, and it's either going to be in the same vCenter or between 2 different vCenters, right? You're going to build that out, and you're going to either bridge if it's the same vCenter, or you're going to do an HCX migration if it's between. And you're going to migrate primarily firewall rules, because you're building the networking ahead of time. You then migrate the workloads, and then you flip the gateway. If there's no networking, you don't have to worry about the gateways, right? It's just the firewall rules. So I'm going to go through this real quick, and then we're going to have DJ do a demo on his tool, and then we can take some questions in. Feel free, as we're going through this, if you guys have any questions, please post them out there if you got any questions as we go through it. All right, so basically, NSX-V on the left, NSX-T on the right. So we want to migrate. There are 2 primary methods with lift and shift, right? And coexist. So is it the same vCenter or 2 different vCenters? So I'm going to kind of talk about both as we go through it. So we're going to start out and do a brand new NSX-T greenfield deployment. We get our edges up and running. This shows just one tier 0. It could be a tier 0, tier 1. It doesn't matter. We do all the failover testing, make sure everything's good, right? And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to establish a bridge if it's the same vCenter. We're going to globally change the MAC of the T1 interface. We're going to build the VNIs with the script like the Damien showed, where the VNI numbers are the same. We're going to make sure it's not connected to the T0 or T1 on the target. We're going to enable forwards transmits and MAC learning on the V side. And we're going to build the bridge and configure it. There's some advanced steps there, and make sure that the TEP is trunked from the bridge to the target. And we've established this environment where we can move workloads across without taking an outage. If it's different vCenters, we're going to use HCX. Now, HCX is a little bit more complex. One of the benefits of an HCX migration is you actually can support on the network extension appliance. If you guys have ever done an HCX, you can have up to 8 interfaces. When you do a bridge, it's like a one-to-one mapping. You deploy a VM, you bridge it. Now you can make it HA, right? Which until just last week wasn't available with HCX. HCX 4.3 now supports an HA network extension pair, right? So you can actually leave this up and running a little bit longer. I know this looks complicated, but you can do an HCX migration. It's not too terrible. That's something we've done quite a few. We've done about 10 of these within the migrations we've done. One little thing to note, when you unextend a network in HCX, you still have to manually or through a script disconnect the interface from the DLR or UDLR in the source, right? It doesn't automatically, when you unextend, it unextends it, but it doesn't remove that gateway. So you could end up with a conflict if you don't do that one manual step there at the end. So that's something to be aware of, but very, very useful tool. Number 3, I'm getting into DJ's time here, so I'm going to try to go quickly. Number 3, you're going to inject IP sets in the source if it is 2 different vCenters. So if it's 2 different vCenters, the migration coordinator, if you're using that method, will not be able to freeze the IP addresses in the source to support a slower migration. So if it's 2 different vCenters and you're using the migration coordinator, you're going to have to inject IP sets into that source, right? If it's manual, you could manually add IP addresses or use a script to do it, right? Or you could use the REST NSX tool. So if you look on the bottom left, when you get to the step, there's a couple different ways you could approach it, depending on which method you pick. So we get the IPs injected in the source. And the reason we do that is because when you migrate things over from V to T, there's a window of time where some stuff is in T and stuff is in V, and it still needs to talk back to V. And you need to have an IP set there, so we don't care where it is. Like, it could be a physical machine in our firewall rule set. It doesn't matter to us, right? So that's an important step. The next one would be to migrate the firewall rules. Again, manually build them, knock yourself out, use a script. We can help you with that. Migration coordinator may work for some things, or you can use the REST NSX migration tool. The great thing about the MAT tool is it kind of really knows how the rules are built and all those considerations about like the VM not existing in the target. His tool understands how that works. So we get the firewall rules moved over. Now notice we're still not connecting the network to the NSX-T side yet. Notice the red X there, right? We've been disconnected this whole time, right? 5, we're going to migrate the workloads over. We're actually moving the VMs over across the bridge or across the HCX extension. And then we're going to flip the gateway. And we just need to make sure the gateway is flipped correctly. We have written a script that can help flip the gateway also. So it's not a manual process. So it makes it a little bit more seamless and quick, so the outage is a little bit less, right? Then there's post-migration cleanup tasks. You know, make sure the rules are good. The mapping of the tags that Damien was talking about, and then going back and removing V. Because remember, when it comes to firewall rule move, you can have a firewall rule and you might have a tag, but the tag is not associated until after the VM goes over. The great thing about the REST NSX tool, he's got that built into his tool. So it actually keeps track of all the information. You migrate the stuff over, and then post, it'll map it back up for you. And then there's a last step to clean up IP sets. We talked about injecting IP sets. One of the last steps you would do is go back into T. Once everything's good, you no longer need those temporary IP sets that you use to help the migration go smoothly. And I am going to just hit this real quick. I kind of already talked about most of the stuff. So, I mean, basically what you need to do is, based on the lessons we've learned, is build a new T environment and migrate to it. And I've called all these things out, right? So just make sure that you are fairly well prepared. You've done all your assessment, you know the environment really well. There are some things you'll notice here in the migration prep, like, for example, in NSX-T, you can't have a section with more than 1,000 rules, or you might have particular things about the firewall rules, and we can help you with that as a partner to look at those things and define them, right? The good thing about this is with the REST NSX tool, you can actually do an assessment. And DJ, I'm going to turn it over to you here so you can talk about your assessment and your migration tool and some of the success you've had there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, everyone, for attending. DJ Antonucci from REST NSX, one of the co-founders of the company. You know, we're kind of in a speed dating session right now, but I appreciate the time, and we're going to get through an entire lift and shift migration. And I will talk about as much of the use cases and you know, awesome stuff as possible. But if we need to schedule something after the fact, we can absolutely do that. So in terms of what I would like for you guys to get out of this session, right? I'm going to show you a lot of cool stuff. I was going to say something else there. A lot of cool stuff. But what I want you to take away from this is that the combination of 27 Virtual's engineering services, that could be scripting or just VMware experience, like they've been doing VMware stuff a long time, and our software is a combination that you're not going to find anywhere else out there. So the combination of our teams, you know, a testament by many, many customers. This is just not, you know, take our word for it. You know, lots of references that we can go back to on these things is that, you know, we have a long-standing history, our two companies, and we have over time tweaked and improved our software based on customer feedback, but also the partner experience of 27 Virtual, saying it would be great if I could inject those temporary IP sets automatically and things like that. So definitely value in the scripting and their engineering services. But what I'm going to do right now is dive into a demo of two things. So you should be seeing my screen here. If you do not, Bill, just let me know. There's
good.
Okay, so there's two products that we offer from RestNSX related to NSX-V to T. The first one is RestNSX, which is our flagship product, obviously the name of our company. And I'm going to log in here real quick to show you a basic concept of RestNSX, which is we are a management platform, right? We are sitting at the management plane. We're a manager of managers, NSX-V, NSX-T, doesn't matter. That's really not the value I'm trying to portray for this for this session. What I'm trying to portray is that we have a lot of tools built into a platform that will not only help you automate, operate, and troubleshoot NSX, but there's a few tools in here that helps us get ready for this T transition. One of them being Object Analyzer. What Object Analyzer does is it looks at my existing environment and tells me what's actually in use. So we have customers out there who swear and say all their firewall rules are highly utilized. I can't get rid of any of them. Well, we all know that that's not exactly a true statement, because firewalls become kind of like Swiss cheese over time, right? People come, people go, policies come, people go, workloads come and go, and you can't keep up with it. So there's going to be gaps in policy. So what Object Analyzer does is it looks at your NSX-V rule set or your T rule set and tells you what's stale or inactive in the environment. So a very quick example of a typical engagement we enter in with 27 Virtual and our customers is that we'll do an NSX-V to T assessment, but let's do a hygiene check first of my existing objects. So for example, in this environment, I see I have 110 NSX-V DFW rules and 97 of them are inactive. Well, why is that? That is because either the rule has no hits on it or it's disabled within this environment. So I can quickly and easily tell in this environment, what is not. I don't have a lot of hits or because of this particular environment. That's a very simple use case, but I can also look at it from a parent-child relationship. So these are all IP sets, 77 of my 146 that are inactive. Why are they inactive? It's because they're referenced but not in use, or not referenced, meaning an orphaned object, right? It's not in a security group, and that security group is not in a firewall rule. And we even take the logic even further. It says, okay, this IP set is referenced but not in use, meaning it's in a security group or in a firewall rule, and that firewall rule is either disabled, there's no hits on it. So we know that parent-child relationship is stale across the board. You can export all this data, go to Splunk or VROPS, whatever it is, and figure out, just validate this data, make sure these rules are not used, and clean them up. We have a customer that we're actively working with that we identified over 40% of their firewall rules and objects are stale, right? Because they use automation processes to create the rules, and cleanup is not as efficient as creation. So that is just one tool of many that I want to show within this platform. But for the sake of time, I'm going to move over to a V to T migration. So this is kind of that prep phase. My other tabs here is I have a source vCenter NSX manager. I have my destination NSX-T manager, and I have the MAT tool sitting in the middle, so migration assistance tool. And just to recap, there's those three methods to go from V to T. And I just want to highlight that we know what we're doing with this software because, and I don't like tooting our own horn, but I'm very proud of this, is that we invented this strategy, right? Myself, my other co-founder of the company, we were at VMware in the NSXBU. We left the company to start our own software company because we saw there's easier ways to do things. And so we invented and coined the phrase lift and shift before it became cool, right? And the idea is that what we do in this approach is that we copy the NSX-V configuration over to NSX-T and mirror it. So that gives me lots of benefits, and it allows me to migrate at my own pace. Hence the need for the things like the temporary IP sets that we're going to show you here in a minute. So the idea is that I move at my own pace, my own comfort. It could be one change window or 10 change windows. Doesn't really matter. Obviously, as you extend it out, you have more implications of routing and those IP sets, but the idea is that we give you the flexibility on what this migration looks like. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to log into my source environment, my NSX manager, and everything is configured in this environment. Logical switches, ESGs, DLRs, load balancing, firewall rules, but I'm going to focus on probably the top use case was around, to Bill's point, firewall rule migration, and really how we handle those exceptions, right? Because a script, a person, a tool can do, copy like for like objects, right? Where the beauty comes in is what we call our intent-based method. So we know what you're trying to do in this migration. And instead of you having to go change your NSX-V environment around to make it compatible with T, we do it for you. And that's what we call our intent-based approach with transformations. So for example, here's a firewall rule that has 2 VMs in the source, a cluster, a distributed port group, a VNet, logical switch, et cetera, all things that you can't put in an NSX-T firewall rule. So there has to be some sort of transformation. We recognize that and say, Mr. Customer, we know you intend to move all the members of this cluster into a group into NSX-T like it is a cluster in V. We know that you want these VMs in a firewall rule, but can't do that in T. So we will do that for you in a compatible method. So the list goes on, but these are just some very basic examples. And we're going to look at this firewall rule set on the far side. In addition, if we look at things like cluster, to Bill's point earlier, is that if I move a VM from my V cluster to my T cluster, this policy becomes affected because that VM is no longer a member of that cluster. So I have a need here for injecting those temporary IP sets so that VMs can roam between V and T without affecting my policy on here. So this is my V setup. I'm going to leave it up and running if we want to refer back to it. But on the far side, I'm going to log into my T manager. And we support global managers, local managers, whatever you need to do for your migration. We don't really differentiate between the two because it's all about what you want to do. Do you want to do multi-site? Do you want to do federation? It's up to you. But from a requirements perspective, what do we require for a migration? The first thing is we need your NSX-T manager built, right? And cluster, however you're going to build it. And depending upon if you're doing network virtualization or just microseg, the following 2 things may or may not be required. For example, from a fabric perspective, if I'm doing network virtualization, I need edge nodes and an edge cluster because I need to instantiate the SR components for load balancing, NAT, firewall, whatever it is on my edges. And so I need some edge nodes. I also need at least 1 edge cluster. Once I have them stood up, which is obviously a very quick and easy thing to do, I can leverage the MAT tool. No other prerequisites on the T side. And from a V perspective, we did a migration just last week from an NSX-V 6.3 customer to NSX-T, right? They're running 6.5 vCenter, old NSX manager. We don't care because it's a lift and shift within there. So we copied between V and T and it worked perfectly. In fact, Cody, who's one of the engineers on our team, is on this call as a participant, and he was involved with that testing and can provide some insight, as we get further into this conversation. So that's the T side, and then sitting in the middle is the MAT tool. Like Bill said, it's an OVA virtual appliance. Download it, install it, and you're essentially staring at this screen. Sorry about that. In 5-10 minutes, right? Download it, install it, and you're staring at the screen. And there's a lot of very unique things about our approach. One is that we allow you to add multiple data sources on the left here. So we can add in up to 12 V managers and point them all to a single T manager. Could be, I want to move this, across vCenter universal manager to the global manager, and I want to move this local manager that only has global objects to a local T manager. I can mix and match however I want. But the idea is that we can help you consolidate your V managers into less T managers because we support this. So as soon as I add my data sources, that's when I get to dictate what this migration looks like. For example, when I add in my data sources, I can run it in migration mode, where I add in the credentials of my T manager, or I can run it in assessment mode. And this allows me to not even have to have my T manager up and running, and it'll provide me an inventory report, but also let me know all those things that T doesn't support and I need to be aware of. So I have a VM and a firewall role. How many of those do I have? I have a cluster and a security group. How many of those do I have? Things that I can either remediate or leverage our platform to do this migration for you without you having to do anything. But obviously for a demo, we're going to keep it in migration mode. And this is where we can select options. For example, here's if I'm bringing multiple V managers to a single T manager, I can append characters to all the objects, meaning I want to add the word mark or the characters mark 1 to every object. So I know it came from NSX Manager 1 or NSX Manager 2. So there's no confusion in T where these objects came from. Under security, this, again, give you the option of what this looks like. For example, if I encounter a firewall rule where it has an unsupported object like a VM in a firewall rule. What do you want me to do about it? We can convert that object over to a VM, like keep track of its name and UUID to reassociate it on the far side. Or we can say migrate as IP. So grab the IPs of the VMs and put them in an IP set at the destination. So equivalently, it's the same thing, just done a little bit differently. But this mode down here is the implementation method, which is snapshot, which is just a straight copy, or zero trust, where I can say anytime I encounter these objects directly or indirectly in a NSX-V firewall rule, I need that temporary IP set, because if I have let's say that cluster example, here in NSX-V, if I move a VM out of that cluster, that policy changes. So I need that temporary IP set. So for the sake of the demo and time, I'm going to turn these off on here, but we're still going to inject those temporary IP sets into NSX-T, and we would do the exact same thing in V, but this makes a lot more sense doing it this way. So the next step of this process is what we call begin data collection. And this is what you would get in assessment mode, right? The main difference between assessment mode and migration mode is that you don't get a next button in this process if I'm in assessment mode. I need my migration license on here. So what we're doing is we're going out and collecting the NSX-V inventory, the vCenter inventory, and going to produce you that report that says, okay, I have 100 firewall rules that have VMs in the rule. I didn't know that, right? Most customers, 60 to 70% of our customers say, I don't have any of that. Well, they do. They just don't realize it because it's been there so long, whatever it is. And so we're going systematically through all the categories of NSX, security groups, IP sets, services, and looking at the entire inventory. And we're marking things as green, oranges, and reds. And this is very intentional for this demo because we want to prove to you that even if we have unsupported objects by NSX-T, we can still migrate them during this effort, right? Because it's that intent-based approach on there. So right now we are going out and calculating on the zero trust IP set saying, okay, you told me if a VM's in a firewall rule, I want to calculate its IP address and store it in my database so I know what temporary IP set to build on the far side. Very similar to what Damien is doing in his scripting, but we're just making it automated. So you check in the UI, it says, I want this, I want that, and we do it for you in the background. So very hands-off approach. And at the end of this collection, I'm going to minimize this window. We're giving a full inventory here of this environment that we can review and export as PDF that we will do here. But we also support what's known as a selective migration. So I could say, I don't want to migrate any security components, just uncheck the box. Or I only want to migrate these very particular IP sets. I can unselect and select whatever I want in here. So a very popular option is for customers to uncheck network virtualization and just do DFW right within here, because sometimes it's easier to pre-build, to Bill's point earlier, that T manager environment, the tier zeros, tier ones, instead of our tool doing it along those lines. But we give you both options on here. So this is what we call the collection phase or assessment phase, and it's wrapping up here just in a minute, but very powerful in terms of quick and easy getting an inventory and assessment of this data. So because of time, I'm not going to download the PDF report, but it's essentially what we see on the screen here. And I'm going to look at, while it's still collecting, that distributed firewall rule and for testing objects. And sorry about that, it refreshes on here because of still collecting data. If I expand testing objects, we see here those firewall rules, and we marked them as info because we're letting you know that, Mr. Customer, your rules contain VMs in the rule sets. T doesn't support it, but don't worry, we're going to take care of it for you along these lines. So that's kind of the pre-migration. I have all my data. Again, it's not exactly a small environment, and that was very, very quick. Export the data as the assessment PDF. We can also export those zero trust IP sets, the raw JSON, for you to use maybe with Postman in your own script, because maybe you don't want our tool to insert them into NSX-V. You want to do it on your own. We'll tell you every rule, every section that needs an IP set and what the data is. So the next step of the process, if I had a migration license, is called review transformations. And this is the intent. This is saying you have selected these objects for migration. Based upon the T manager that we detected, we are going to do the following things. And just very quickly, I'm going to focus on that distributed firewall rule here. And I think it's on page 2. Testing objects, and it's marked as info again because it has VMs in it. And what we've done here is marked it as info, but we've told you what we're going to do. We're going to, one, create a temporary IP set because you enabled zero trust. And this is going to be the name of it, which is, section ID, rule name, rule ID, et cetera. So I know on here. But we also are going to create an NS group with the effective VMs in it. So we're going to create an NS group with this VM in it and that VM in it, because NSX-T does not support VMs in a firewall role. So we make it compatible automatically for you. And this is also where I can do other overrides. For example, I could set the, sorry about that. I can set the, apply to differently. I can add rules to existing sections. If I'm doing load balancing, I can say, put it on this edge node instead of the default, whatever it is, I can do that all right here. So I can get this report as well, clear it with management, say, this is what the tool is going to do if I click this button. But for the sake of the demo, we're going to say, yep, we can talk to NSX-T, we can write and we can delete things as needed. Let's begin the migration. And here's my zero trust impact saying I selected not to do it in NSX-V, so no rules are going to be impacted, but 99 rules in T will receive these temporary IP sets. So let's proceed here. And now we're systematically going through those same categories and building all the objects. Once I get to DFW, I'm going to go over to my T interface, but I'll go over there right now just to show you this is not smoke and mirrors. These are some existing policies that exist there. We're not going to override them. We're just going to add to them, which really holds true to the fact that we can do a many-to-one migration out there. So going through there, if there's existing services that have the same port protocol and the name, we will reference it. If not, we're going to create a new one on here. So this should go by pretty quickly. And Bill, I think I should be able to wrap up within the next 3 minutes, believe it or not. So I don't think we're really short on time. But while this is, oh, actually, we got to DFW pretty quick. So let me go back into NSX-T. And our section is not there, right? We're looking for testing objects, but you notice everything has mark 1 on it because that's what we told it to do. So we know where it came from. All right, here's our testing objects. And notice a few things. One is I created that temporary IP set that has the IP addresses of those 2 VMs in it. So this is my zero trust object. The other thing I did was I created a NS group and I put those 2 VMs in it, right? And you may be thinking, well, how did that happen if those VMs still live on an NSX-V cluster? The reason being is that we track VMs based upon name and UUID. And that is for customers going to different vCenters. Because if I move a VM from vCenter A to vCenter B, it gets a new UUID. And most tools don't know what to do with it. So we track it based upon UUID and name. What I did in NSX-T created a VM with the exact same name as I have in V and T. So therefore I said, oh, it's in inventory. I will add it to the security group automatically doing this migration on here. So we built the environment. I know we didn't really go through the networking components, but if we look at load balancers, I guess it's still working on them on that side. Yep, still working on load balancers. Should actually start. Yes, see they're starting to pop in here. All the virtual servers, virtual pools, et cetera. So the idea is that it's a mirrored configuration. I'm sitting here and I can focus my time on the migration strategy and approach, testing and troubleshooting versus the tools, right? Because historically speaking, again, this is not a ding on VMware. This is just historically speaking, their migration tools have not been the best, right? I've lived it. You guys have probably lived it. They make great products, but the migration tools have come short. Migration Coordinator has come a long way, trust me. But still, there's a lot of situations where it doesn't work. But I'm always a proponent of use free when you can use it, right? It's tough to argue with free. So from our tool perspective, we've done, right? We've done everything. We've built everything. I can roll back, which I'll do at the end of the demo. We can review it, which is the PDF. But I can also go to this dashboard and do the things that I couldn't do during the migration. And that's what we call post-migration tasks. So for example, I couldn't assign tags to VMs that weren't in existence, right? The reason I can do this one is because even though it has a different UUID, this one is DE47 and in T it's 40FB. They're different, but I can assign it because I show it as available because there's a VM with the exact same name. Right? I could use HCX, I could, vMotion, whatever it is over to there. So I can assign it. So these are all the things that we couldn't do during the migration, and that's what are called post-migration tasks. But let's say for a moment that I'm okay with the migration. I validated everything. I've moved hosts over. I've tested the connectivity on here. I can now clean up all those zero trust objects via point and click. It says, you know what? I'm happy with my policy, the migration. And we come in here and select all my temporary IP sets. Again, this could be V or T. Remember, I only did it for NSX-T, but I could have obviously done it for NSX-V as well. So we're going rule by rule and removing it from the DFW rule, but then also deleting this from the inventory in NSX-T. And we may have gotten to our section so far. Let's go validate here. Let's look at testing objects. And yes, all we're left here is that cluster with the VMs in it, and that temporary IP set is gone within NSX-T and or V in this environment. So,
yeah, and I guess the point too is that the reason we need those temporary IP sets is, especially with the groups and tags, like the VMs get migrated over, and we need to have that temporary IP set on the T side during the window of time until we have a chance to reassociate the tag. Is that not right?
Yep, that's exactly right. And what 27 Virtual has done is some enhanced scripting that allows you to update those IP sets if you have to bring on new workloads, change firewall rules, whatever. Because from our perspective, it's kind of like a lift and shift snapshot, if you will, right? We can synchronize, some things between V and T, but they do a very good job at saying, okay, I need to update these IP sets based upon a new workload that's provisioned, whatever it may be. So they've been a great partner on enhancing our tool from that perspective. And let's say for a moment, I went through the exercise. I took a very common use case is a customer takes production NSX-V data using our tool, right? Do it that and connect it to a lab NSX-T manager. Because it's non-disruptive and non-impactful to V, unless I'm doing IP sets, those temporary IP sets, I could do a migration, a mock migration from that to that. We can also use our REST NSX tool, which is common, to copy NSX-V production firewall rules over to the lab via a one button click. I can say, copy these sections and these objects to my lab environment. And then I can do a real mock migration in the lab, in a lab V manager and a lab T manager. So lots and lots of options. And the last thing I'll show, Bill, and I'll turn back over to you, I don't need to talk through this, is that at any point I can roll back. So we will roll back to the state that we were before this demo. I'm not going back to the factory defaults. I'm not going to delete anything that we did not create. Just everything that we built in that T environment, we are rolling back within our system. So as this starts to refresh, I'll close this. I'm going to turn it back over to Bill for questions and follow-up.
Wow, that's an amazing demo. I love it. So, we've worked with DJ on some pretty big projects. We have one right now. What is it, like 15,000 firewall rules? Is that right, DJ?
Yeah, it keeps growing, but yeah, it's 15,000 today.
Right. So we've done, small ones, 200 rules, 500 rules, 2,000 rules, 2,500 rules, 15,000 rules, you name it, we've seen it. And we've been doing these projects together for the last year. So there's a lot of value in that. And you can kind of see the number of customers and partner-led deployments that have been done using DJ's tool with REST NSX. It's awesome. 27 Virtual can help you in all these different scenarios. And we understand what it takes to get the tools deployed, get them installed, up and running, to do the initial testing. One of the great features that DJ pointed out there with the rule migration is you can pick like one section. Like if you want to do a test to make sure everything's functionally the way you think it should be, you can do that, right? So you can definitely go in there and just test what you need. So it's very, very flexible. But again, it's kind of choose your method. You can do it manual. You can do it using the migration coordinator. You can do a combination of manual migration coordinator. You can use the REST NSX mat tool. And then across all of those, there could be some possible custom scripting that needs to be done. And we've done so many different migrations. If you guys need help, that's something we can definitely help you with. So, we do NSX-T, VRNI network assessments, proof of concepts, V to T migrations, custom scripting and VRO workflow builds, mat assessments and migrations. We can come in and do a workshop just to see where you guys are at for free. If you guys are interested in a migration, let us know. We can help you do an initial free assessment to get an idea what your environment looks like. Just a manual assessment. We also can leverage PSO credits. So if you're a VMware customer and you purchase VMware partner credits, you can leverage those credits and transfer them to 27 Virtual to perform particular tasks for your organization. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up. How do I do that? I was going to make sure that there's no questions. Any other questions? There's been a few questions posted there about bridging. We answered those questions in the chat. Are there any other questions you folks have? Where is my participant panel at?
And I do apologize. You know, I am Italian and I tend to talk very fast with my hands. If I was on video, you would laugh on how much I use my hands, but we definitely would, you know, love a follow-on session with any of you guys to do a deeper dive in the strategies, migration approaches, you know, if then scenarios. Oh, I have these firewall rules with these objects in it. How would it be handled? So I'm more than happy to do so. Just, you know, thank you for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, once you fill out the survey, we'll pick a few folks there to receive that $100 Amazon gift card. That's awesome. If you have any questions, you can email andrew.grismore. He's been monitoring the chat at 27virtual.com. You got any further questions, feel free to reach out anytime. And if you have any questions, just let us know. Thank you very much for joining. And I'll just leave the room, sit here for a few minutes, just in case anybody has any other questions as it kind of drops off. But thank you very much for joining, everybody. Thank you.
Well, we always know there's some shy ones out there, so you must stick around.